being around somebody that feel like they know it all, I don't want to be around that person, right? I don't want to be the smartest person in the room.
I never told anybody, like, look, I'm the smartest person in the room. That may be how they took it. But let's keep it a buck. Like, in sports, no offense to everybody in sports, but the bar is f***ing low. You know what I mean? Like, the bar isn't that high.
Jaylen Brown has finally responded to what many believe was a subtle shot from Jayson Tatum, and he definitely didn't ignore it. What initially appeared to be nothing more than a motivational speech for young basketball players quickly had much of the NBA community convinced that Tatum was sending a carefully aimed message at his former teammate. Brown's reaction made one thing clear: he saw it too. The instant Brown acknowledged it, the entire basketball world started paying attention. Because to a huge number of NBA fans, Jayson Tatum wasn't simply speaking to a room full of young athletes. He seemed to be delivering a message, one that was quiet, measured, and carefully crafted. The kind of statement that allows someone to deny any hidden meaning while leaving everyone else free to read between the lines. But this story didn't begin with that speech, and it certainly doesn't end with a social media response. It reaches back through a heartbreaking playoff collapse that reopened every question Boston thought it had already answered. It runs through reports from inside the locker room that completely changed how people viewed one of the NBA's most successful partnerships. And it leads to the blockbuster trade that officially ended an era. To understand why just a few comments at a summer basketball camp created so much attention, you first have to understand everything that happened beforehand. Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum entered Boston only 1 year apart. Almost immediately, it became obvious the Celtics had found something special. They had two long, athletic wings capable of scoring at an elite level, defending multiple positions, and bringing the kind of competitive mentality that wins basketball games. As the years passed, both players developed into perennial all-stars. Together, they led Boston on multiple deep playoff runs during one of the toughest periods the Eastern Conference had seen in years. Season after season, they dealt with criticism, refined their games, and continued delivering when the pressure was at its highest. Eventually, they reached the mountaintop together. In 2024, Boston captured the NBA championship and Jaylen Brown earned Finals MVP, narrowly beating out Tatum for the honor. Looking back now, many fans see that moment as the first visible sign of tension in a partnership that had quietly managed any internal issues behind closed doors. For a long time, Tatum and Brown felt inseparable, the way only the greatest sports duos do. It became difficult to picture one without the other, because together they had become the identity of the Celtics. Boston fans weren't simply cheering for Tatum or Brown individually. They were invested in everything the two stars had built together. Yet even winning a championship wasn't enough to keep the partnership intact. The 2026 playoffs, that question was answered in the harshest way imaginable. Boston entered the postseason with legitimate championship expectations after finishing the regular season with 56 wins. Tatum had returned from the torn Achilles he suffered during the previous playoffs, though he was still working his way back from one of the most devastating injuries in professional sports. While Tatum recovered, Brown had carried the Celtics as the unquestioned first option, averaging 28.7 points per game and finishing 6th in MVP voting. The Celtics entered the first round as the second seed and quickly built a 3-1 series lead over the 7th-seeded Philadelphia 76ers. At that point, advancing looked inevitable. Then, everything fell apart. Philadelphia fought back one game at a time. Just hours before Game 7, Boston announced that Tatum had been ruled out with left knee stiffness. Their franchise player, still recovering from his Achilles injury, would miss the biggest game of the season. Boston fell 109-100 at TD Garden. It wasn't merely the loss itself that stunned everyone. It was the way it happened. blowing a 3-1 series lead to a 7th seed, losing 3 consecutive games after holding complete control, then being forced into a winner-take-all game without their biggest star. Teams don't lose 3-1 leads without deeper issues, and the people inside the organization understood that just as much as everyone watching from the outside. Questions immediately started pouring in. Did Boston have the wrong supporting cast around its stars? Was the chemistry between Tatum and Brown really as strong as everyone believed? Had this roster already reached its limit? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, had both players simply outgrown playing alongside one another? Those discussions only intensified when Boston's front office made the decision that permanently changed both players' careers. The Celtics traded Jaylen Brown to the Philadelphia 76ers in exchange for Paul George, 2 first-round picks, and 2 second-round selections. The very team that had just eliminated Boston from the playoffs was now adding its second-best player. The same city that had watched Brown suffer through that devastating playoff collapse would now welcome him as one of its own. And Philadelphia wasn't finished. The Sixers had already signed LeBron James during free agency, creating a roster built around Brown, Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and the NBA's all-time leading scorer. The entire picture was remarkable, but what made the trade so shocking wasn't simply the players involved, it was the finality of it all. After nearly a decade together, endless debates about roster construction, and years of off-season speculation, the Tatum-Brown era was officially at an end. One phone call, one press release, and suddenly 2 players who had spent years building together would now spend the rest of their careers trying to win without one another. Fans reacted in completely different ways. Some believed the move had become unavoidable because of salary cap realities and repeated playoff disappointments. Others felt Boston had made a massive mistake by breaking up one of the league's most successful duos. But regardless of where fans stood on the trade itself, another storyline quickly emerged through the reporting that followed. According to multiple NBA insiders, the relationship between Tatum and Brown had grown noticeably more distant during their final season together. Several reports described a partnership that had quietly changed over time, suggesting the 2 stars were no longer as close off-court as many people assumed. The reporting remained cautious, as it usually does when discussing active players, but the overall picture was difficult to ignore. According to people familiar with the situation, 2 teammates who always projected unity publicly had gradually drifted apart behind the scenes. That revelation landed harder than almost anything else connected to the trade. For years, the story surrounding Tatum and Brown had been built on the belief that they genuinely respected and appreciated one another. Fans watched them celebrate victories together, defend one another during interviews, and support one another through difficult stretches. The idea that their relationship had quietly cooled beneath the surface was something very few people had expected. Importantly, none of the reports pointed to one dramatic argument or a single explosive falling out. There wasn't one explosive locker room argument that reporters could point to, and no single confrontation was ever confirmed as the exact moment everything fell apart. Instead, what slowly became clear was a gradual separation between 2 players with different personalities, communication styles, and leadership philosophies who spent nearly a decade in one of the NBA's most demanding environments before quietly drifting in different directions. And that slow evolution became the lens through which everything else was later interpreted. Analysts spent weeks debating what those reports actually meant, with most respected voices agreeing the issue was never talent. No one doubted Jaylen Brown's ability to perform at an NBA level, but rather the internal dynamics of the locker room, including who naturally led conversations, how leadership was expressed, and the subtle day-to-day interactions that never show up in statistics. and that conversation intensified when Fox News host Colin Cowherd, claiming league sources, had begun carrying himself like the smartest person in every room he's in, no longer listening to his bosses, consultants, or teammates, saying, "Jaylen Brown has, it's almost like a disease. He suddenly thinks he's the smartest person in every room he's in. You make a lot of money, and suddenly you're convinced you're always right. You stop listening to your bosses, you stop listening to consultants, you stop listening to your teammates." A comment that spread quickly and added fuel to an already growing narrative. While that kind of perception is not unusual among elite competitors whose confidence can sometimes blur into stubbornness, it carried extra weight in the context of a franchise that had just traded its second-best player only 2 years after winning a championship. And soon that storyline became the central explanation for the quiet shift between two players once seen as the foundation of Boston's future. Which is why Jayson Tatum's summer basketball camp in St. Louis.
The people who believed Tatum's speech was completely innocent had a fair argument, because leadership advice aimed at young athletes doesn't have to target a specific person to be meaningful. And Jayson Tatum has never been known as someone who publicly airs personal issues. But at the same time, those who felt there was a hidden message also had a strong point, since the precision of his words, along with months of reporting that described Jaylen Brown in very similar terms, made it hard for many to see it as a coincidence. And while both sides debated the meaning, what they quietly agreed on was that the real answer would come from what happens on the court, especially when Philadelphia and Boston meet and every camera focuses on both players long before tip-off, with analysts breaking down every glance, every interaction, and every moment between two former teammates who once shared nearly a decade together before becoming rivals. And the attention is so intense because the history between them is so deep. Since almost 10 years of shared success, including the 2024 championship and countless defining moments for the franchise, cannot simply disappear when jerseys change. Instead, it becomes the hidden storyline behind every matchup, revealing how great partnerships often involve sacrifices fans never fully see. Built by two players with different personalities, priorities, and visions of what success meant. And relationships like this rarely end from one big moment, but instead fade through many small ones that build up over time until the connection can no longer hold. And by the time Boston made the trade, it was already clear the relationship had nearly run its course, and the move only made it official. While questions about whether Tatum's comments at his foundation camp were aimed at Brown may never be answered, since neither player is likely to confirm or confront it publicly, as both understand the weight of their words in today's NBA and have no real benefit from turning it into a public conflict. Yet fans will continue watching closely, because if Brown succeeds in Philadelphia, or if Tatum leads Boston forward without past complications, each outcome will be used as proof in different narratives. And that is why this story continues to grow, since championship partnerships often don't end with drama, but with gradual distance between two people who were once inseparable. And while what they built in Boston was real, so were the differences that eventually pulled them apart. And now, every time they face each other, every possession carries that shared history, making this rivalry impossible to ignore. And regardless of what Tatum meant or didn't mean, the basketball world is now waiting to see how Brown responds and what both players do next. So if you think this kind of split changes how teams should build around stars, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you want to follow how this rivalry continues to unfold, because this story is far from over.